In days past, the roundhouse was where the railroad worker united with the steam locomotive, each to prepare for the journey ahead. Today, it's where we examine the history, the industry, the machines, the hobby, and the passion behind railroading. News, interviews, stories, and more. So climb aboard. This is The Roundhouse.
Welcome to The Roundhouse. I'm your host, Nick Ozrak, and this is Minisode number 1, where we take some of our full-length episodes of the past and select bite-sized stories to share with you in 15 minutes or less. Today, we're talking to Rich Melvin, who at the time was the senior engineer for Nickel Plate Road 765 of the Fort Wayne Railroad Historical Society, about his experience being a steam locomotive engineer. As you said earlier, Norfolk Southern is the most recent, but you have also partnered in the past with the Chessie and CSX. So over the past 30 years of operations and touring all over the eastern U.S., what are some of your favorite memories of different trips and different locations?
Well, there's an awful lot of them, and we'd have to go another 2 hours if I was to tell you all of them, but I'll see if I can pick a couple. The New River trains were always special because of where they ran in the most scenic part of West Virginia you could possibly imagine, and of course they always ran in the middle of October, fall color season. Because of the popularity of the trains, the train size grew until it was about 1990, 91, around in there. The train grew to 34 cars, which was a monster passenger train. The first year that the train grew to 34 cars, I was standing on the platform in Huntington. Locomotive was spotted right there, and the train stretched out almost a half a mile from that point west. And I commented to the road foreman, the CSX road foreman who was going to ride with us, that we appreciated the fact that they had allowed us a 60-mile-an-hour speed limit this year. The speed limit had kind of gone up a little bit each year. We started at 50, and then a couple of years was 55, and they saw that things ran well and we didn't have any issues. So they had authorized 60 miles an hour on this particular year. And I made the comment to the road foreman that I thanked him very much for the fact that that had happened. That's going to help us get over the road and get back a little sooner at night and so forth. And he said, well, yeah, but we ain't going to see 60 miles an hour with this train until we're going down the other side of Scary Hill, which is about 30 miles out of Huntington. I kind of made a mental note of that. The next morning, once we got out of Huntington and on the road to Barbersville, I had some issues in Huntington with slippery rail because it was rainy and foggy, but in Barbersville, the sun was shining. And I was able to get good traction from there on, and had discussed with the fireman what I was going to do if we had the rail to do it. He was ready, I was ready, and I made darn sure that road foreman saw that we were going 60 miles an hour going up Scary Hill. He was very impressed.
Well, it strikes me that there have been quite a few supervisors and managers who have underestimated the power of 765. Talk about the hill going east out of Buffalo.
Yes, you've evidently seen the video, Listen for the Whistle. I told that story there, and it is a good indication of how, yes, today's railroader does not have a good appreciation for a locomotive that actually develops more horsepower as it goes faster, because a diesel doesn't do that. We were running trips out of Buffalo to Corning along what's now called the Southern Tier, the old Erie main line. And eastbound, the little town of Attica is, maybe a fourth of the way to Corning. There's a 30-mile-an-hour speed restriction through that town because of the curve there. And then there's this grade that starts right out of Attica called Attica Hill. The night before this trip was to run, Friday night, I was down by the locomotive, and the Conrail road foreman drove up, and he and I started talking, and he said, "How does this thing do on hills?" I said, "Well, it'll do okay with this train. I think the train was only about 22 cars." And he said, "Well, I mean, how does it do on the hills?" I said, "Well, I think it's going to be fine. What are we talking about?" And he said, "Well, we got this hill out here called Attica Hill. And some of our trains have a tough time on it, and I'm just a little concerned whether we're going to need a helper out there." So I asked him, "How long is the hill?" He said, 6 miles. "How steep is it?" 1%, maybe a little bit more. "And how fast will we be going into the bottom of it?" And he said 30 miles an hour. Well, I knew from experience that we'd go over the top at 30 miles an hour, and that's what I told him. And he said, "Man, I got to see that to believe it." He really didn't believe me. He said, "I really got to know, because if we're going to need a helper out there, I'm going to make arrangements for it." I said, "We won't need a helper. We'll be fine." So we got out on the trip the next morning, had been running along at 50, had to slow to 30 miles an hour to go through Attica. This was a permanent speed restriction there in the little town. Slowed around the curve and started up the hill, and I could see where the hill started. He came over to me and said, "This is that hill I was telling about. You better go after it." Okay, I pulled the throttle out a couple of additional notches, but the locomotive seemed to be doing just fine where it was. Speedometer crept up a little bit to 31. Now, I've got the engine working pretty good, but it's by no means that hard of a pull. And I only had the throttle maybe 2/3 of the way out as you looked at it on the quadrant. And he's looking at it from the other side of the engine, and I think he's concerned that I'm not working hard enough, because he came back over again. This time he was almost like he was angry. He said, "Look, this is a bad hill. You better go after it." All right, fine. I pulled the throttle out a little bit more and noted that the speedometer was now showing 32 miles an hour. He sat over behind the fireman for a little bit and suddenly realized, hey, we're not slowing down. And he had realized the pace of the exhaust had picked up a little bit. And I'm over there thinking, well, maybe he knows more about this hill than I do. It's not my railroad. He knows it. Maybe around this curve it gets steeper or something. Well, he came over where the speedometer is now showing 34 and says, man, this thing is strong. Well, we got to get back to 30. So I just backed off the throttle a little bit, let it settle back to 30 miles an hour. And he went back over on the other side and lit up a cigar and wasn't all that concerned about the hill anymore. That happens a lot today because modern-day railroaders are not used to an engine that makes more power as it goes faster.
You can hear more about Rich's experience in Roundhouse episode number 3, the link for which is in the show notes of this minisode. Thanks for listening, and remember that the Roundhouse is our house.